But let's talk about your background, and let's talk about George Pirie, the man. We know you grew up in Porcupine, but tell us about that.
Sure, Kevin. I was born in South Porcupine High School, Hospital. Kevin, I was born in South Porcupine Hospital. I was raised at the mine site villages of Dome and Dome X. Raised with a family of 4 brothers and 2 sisters. We didn't have much, but boy, we thought we had everything. We grew up in duplexes in both Dome X and Dome. Marvelous place to grow up, rich, rewarding life, because I was lucky enough to be raised into with a very loving, supportive, honest, ethical family that knew the value of hard work and knew the value of focus on on how to get ahead, on how to achieve what you wanted to achieve in life. Thanks to my mom and dad. They, of course, were products of the Depression and the Second World War, and those 2 events impacted them and therefore impacted us and how we viewed our world. My family's tradition of civic service is formed by those events. My grandfather served on my mother's side of the family, served in the First World War, in the trenches of the First World War, when he was 16 years old. Make no mistake about it, he wanted to get out when he got over there, and they wouldn't let him. So he was discharged out of the First World War, having served his time in the trenches there. He met my grandmother actually in that process, and on my mother's side of the family, they came to Canada. They flipped a coin and Canada won. It was either that or Australia. They ended up coming to Canada. He ended up finding work in Oshawa, and of course 1929 hit, and they made their way to the Porcupine. They lived north of Cochrane initially, the first winter, in a little place called The Rock, and they went up there to farm because my grandmother had relatives up there that said this was a good place to farm. Well, they lived in the side of in a sod hut in the side of a hill in the first winter north of Cochrane. And I don't think my grandfather scored too many points trying to farm up there. Obviously had to come south to the Timmins to look for work in the gold mines. First winter they were down here. They lived behind Simpson Lake in an old abandoned bunkhouse at the Little Pet Mine. And my mother remembers as a small girl pulling the moss off the rocks there to chink the holes between the logs in the wall. So we, those memories of my mom and my dad they're etched in like stone into our background. So that's a strong foundation of my belief about the value of a dollar and what it takes to survive and get ahead in this world. Hard work.
Those are very vivid memories. That's a very vivid description of your family's early life in the Porcupine. Why do you think it's so vivid in your mind?
Because you can actually picture it. If you can picture my mother telling that story, and she was a small girl. She tells about leaving the house in Oshawa as a small girl, 6-year-old girl, and leaving everything they owned. They shut that door, and they left everything they owned, including her dollhouse and her dolls and all her toys, only what they could carry in their suitcase, and getting on a train and arriving in La Roque. My oldest aunt, who just the eldest in that family, the oldest sister, vividly memories of getting off that train in La Roque and wondering where they were. So those memories were passed on to us. My father's memories, he was 16 years old in grade 13, and he says, hey, and he was one of the smartest men I ever knew, and he failed Latin in grade 13 at 16 years old. Well, there was 2,000 people lined up to get jobs at the Dome, so he went. His dad worked there, and he worked at the Dome. The only time he didn't work at the Dome in his career was, of course, when he went away and joined the Navy in the Second World War. That's where he learned his trade as an electrician. But if you can imagine somebody telling you about what it was like, and I remember asking him, what was it like, Dad, in the Depression? He said it was great if you had money. If you didn't have money, you're lined up at the door, and we had thousands of people, the Hollinger, the McIntyre, the Dome, all these mines on the background, thousands of people. And he said it was an incredible experience because they knew what families to go to that would help them out, that would give them a meal, these guys, and everybody was down on their luck. And you tried to help people as much as possible because you could certainly relate to their experience. Serving in the Second World War, of course, fundamentally my mom and dad were married before the during the Second World War, before my dad went away. My two oldest siblings were born during the Second World War. That experience, of course, forever changed that relationship and our family. There was no counseling when they came back. They came and they joined the Legion and they got on with their lives as best as they could. And they all did a marvelous job raising us kids and our family. But my mother-in-law and my father-in-law both served in the Second World War as well. My mother, both in the Air Force. My father-in-law got his Distinguished Flying Cross. I have another very bright individual, of course, that impacted by the Second World War, and he ended up spending the rest of, arriving at the Dome probably about 1952 after a series of business ventures, both back out in the prairies in Nokomis and Valgagne, but arrived back and working at the Dome. And he had, again, an individual like my father and uncles and playing hockey, so that's how they arrived here in the Porcupine in the first place, with the old Senior A leagues. But finished up with from 1932 to retired in 1986. Forever impacted their view on how you raised your family, the importance of a dollar, and managing things wisely. So that forever impacted us and our views and our association and with our community. Remembrance Day, obviously, a very, very important part of our lives, and that of course was transmitted down to my daughter and my son. Remembrance Day is kind of like a I think maybe it isn't too strong a word, but sacred. That you remember those people that served, lost their lives, or were imprisoned. My dad had a picture of his junior hockey team, and half the members on that front row were either killed or, in fact, imprisoned. My one of my brothers, Mickey, is named Mickey after Mickey Turcotte, who was a prisoner of war. My youngest brother is Paul, but his first name is Joseph Paul Pirie. He's named after Joe Lone, who was my dad's best friend and the goalie on that junior hockey team, and Joe lost his life in the Second World War. So never too far from your memory and your sense of the impact those events had on our family's lives. So very, very, and not trivial, very, very important.
I've heard you mention, and I'm familiar with it, the Dome and the Dome X. Mm-hmm. If you're under, I'm just going to take a wild guess here at an age. If you're under the age of 35, probably, the whole term Dome X may not be familiar to you. So for people that have heard you say that, mm-hmm. I grew up in the Dome and the Dome X, describe the Dome and the Dome X to those who are unfamiliar.
Oh, they were mine site villages, and everybody that worked there worked for the mine. It was a great place. We had outdoor rinks, we had tennis courts, we had the best of athletic facilities, including a ballpark that hosted the 1936 soccer finals. I mean, the 1936 team from the Dome went to the soccer finals, if you will, in Winnipeg. I mean, it was. You knew this stuff. You became very proud of where you were from. There was a natural rivalry between all of the mines, whether it be the Preston or the Buffalo Anchorite, the Paymaster, the Hollinger, the McIntyre, Pamour. You grew up with those names like Hollinger Green Shirts and Dome Porkies, but the other part of it was the quality of life as it relates to the freedom to, we were always out in what same as Shania Twain, we called it the bush, just like she says. It's the bush. It's never the forest, it's never the woods, it's the bush. We were always out in the bush. If we weren't involved in some kind of athletic venture, then we were out enjoying ourselves in the bush, doing things summer and winter, whether it be snowshoeing or downhill skiing or cross-country skiing. Good, really healthy lifestyle.
And I'm guessing that your mother, like most mothers in those days, had this deep voice where she'd open the front door and just yell out, "Boys, time to come home for supper."
Nope, it was my dad.
Oh.
It was my dad that yelled, and boy, you moved. I mean, because like every other family, everybody ate dinner at 5 o'clock. And my older brother Mick will tell funny stories about playing long shots on the rink, and everybody knew when Dad yelled, we went. And so you had to, was always the first guy to score 10, and Mick might be winning 10 to nothing or 9 to nothing, and the other guy wouldn't, Dad called, and the other guy wouldn't shoot because Mick wouldn't, Mick, you know, ay. So there was all kinds of funny stories about that lifestyle and what it meant. People, you know, it was working families, and you ate at 5 o'clock. I mean, my dad retired at 65 in 1985. My dad never owned his own house. Never owned his own house. Big family, cheap rent at the Domex and Dome. Not paid a lot of money. Never owned his own house. But I tell you, we never wanted for anything, and most importantly, we never wanted for love.